Welcome to the Moved to Meditate podcast. I'm your host, Addie D. Hilster. This is a place for vibrant discussions about mindfulness, movement practices, and ways to find more balance and presence in daily life. Here you'll find resources to help you progress on your path, as well as insightful conversations with mindful movement, yoga, meditation, and Dharma teachers from a range of traditions. On this podcast, we spotlight embodied approaches to mindfulness and the more contemplative aspects of movement practice. Listen in and connect to a community of like-minded practitioners. Hello, everyone. Thanks for dropping by the podcast today. I am really excited to share this episode with you because I learned so much from this conversation. My guest in this episode is Ying Deng, and we'll be talking about the benefits and challenges of mindfulness meditation for those with ADHD. There is some research that shows mindfulness to be an effective practice for helping people with ADHD direct their focus, regulate their emotions, and more. But, understandably, meditation presents some inherent difficulties for ADHD, and some of the standard mindfulness techniques might not be completely accessible. So in this interview, Ying shares about her journey with mindfulness and ADHD, how she got diagnosed as an adult, and how often the symptoms are missed in particularly high-achieving women. She also talks about how one's cultural background can influence the way their ADHD shows up and whether it's recognized. We also talk in detail about different mindfulness and meditation practices and how to adapt them for ADHD. If you're listening because you have ADHD and you're interested in learning to meditate, I think you'll get some really helpful ideas from this conversation. And be sure to find the additional resources on the podcast page of my website at movedtomeditate.yoga/podcast. There's a great list there, and you can just go click on the different links and explore all the resources that Ying provided. I hope that this episode will also be helpful for mindfulness teachers. I know it gave me a lot to think about because some of Ying's suggestions weren't exactly what I expected. I'm so grateful to learn more and understand ADHD better so I can consider ways of making meditation more doable and practical for more people. One of the things Ying did mention in this discussion about ADHD is how helpful mindful movement can be. And as you listen to this episode, I think you'll really get why a movement-based approach to mindfulness could be very ADHD friendly. So I do want to mention that the next round of my mindful movement teacher training is coming up. We start in October. If you are interested in teaching accessible movement practices that really center mindfulness, please check this out. It's open to meditation teachers, therapists, coaches, and other facilitators who want to add an embodied movement component to what they do. And also it's open to yoga and movement teachers who want to bring a more contemplative style of practice to their students. All the info on the schedule, the guest teachers, the topics we cover, all the different movement modalities and techniques we work with, that's all on my website at movedtomeditate.yoga/MMTT. Okay, last thing as we prepare to head into this interview, because there's so much information in this one, I just want to request that if you learn something from this episode or you feel inspired by this conversation, or if you're listening and you just think of someone who could benefit from hearing this, please pass it along. Send this episode to a friend, text it to them, do whatever. Post it on social media or give us a review on Apple Podcasts. That's another option that's a really great way to help people find this show and this kind of information. Okay, thank you again for being here today, and I hope you'll really enjoy this interview with Ying Deng. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the podcast. My guest today is Ying Deng, and she's the founder of ADHD Asian Girl, which is a platform that provides support and resources for people with ADHD, especially Asian women. She's a certified transformation life coach with additional training in positive psychology and she's currently in Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach's 2-year mindfulness meditation teacher certification program, MMTCP. Part of her work is making meditation more accessible for ADHD people. And I ran across Ying's work on social media and remembered her from when I took the mindfulness mentor training at Cloud Sangha because she was working there at the
Yeah.
time. And when I saw what she was doing with mindfulness and ADHD, I knew I wanted to learn more. So, welcome to the podcast, Ying, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie, for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this, and I love the podcast. And I think a lot of information you provide could be really beneficial for ADHD folks who want to learn more about mindfulness in general as well.
Oh, thank you. That's really great to hear. I'm honored that you have listened.
Yeah.
So, I think a good place to start would be if you would just talk a little bit about ADHD and what your understanding of it is. And I'm asking this because I think there may be some misconceptions for people who are not that familiar, and that maybe what we're learning is like it shows up really differently for different people, or there's different types of ADHD, or it just sort of depends on one's age or just other factors. So that's a really big question, but
Yeah.
maybe a good place to start.
Absolutely. So ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So a lot of people just think about either you lack attention or you're hyperactive, but in reality, it has three different subtypes. One is called inattentive, so that's the one I have. One is called hyperactive. That's usually what we think when we think about ADHD, somebody who's on the go all the time and just fidgeting and can't stop talking. That's usually the one we think about. And then there's the combined type, which means they have a little bit of the inattentive symptoms and hyperactive symptoms. So it really impacts something called executive functioning, which means how to start a task, how to stop a task, how to stay on task, planning, and complete the plan for yourself and encourage yourself to stay on task. All those things are impacted by ADHD. So and it impacts more than just our work. It impacts our life. A lot of my clients and me included, sometimes it would be even hard to brush our teeth or cook a meal because all those things require brain power that we already have less of, and less spoons, less bandwidth in general. And it also have a lot of comorbidities with depression, anxiety, eating disorder, and oftentimes it shows up with people on the autistic spectrum. It shows up with people on the autistic spectrum as well. So
Hmm.
it's very like interconnected with other things as well.
That makes sense. And is it something that's like kind of on a spectrum, because like we all can get distracted and we all have like unfinished projects and things like that, but can you talk a little bit about like what is the difference between that, just sort of like regular kind of distraction and what you would call ADHD?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the big thing is a lot of times with ADHD folks, even if we want to do something, we have a hard time doing the task initiation. And it could be I really want to write a blog and I just could not get myself to do it. And we have to find other ways to motivate ourselves, or trick my brain to do it almost. So I think a big part of it is we want to do those things, but we have a hard time initiating it. And another big part is, like I said, we have a hard time stop doing something. We can be so hyper focusing
Hmm.
something for hours and we forgot to eat and we forgot to go to the bathroom, and that's a pretty common occurrence among ADHD folks. So I think it's the quantitative difference. We do the same thing but just to a much bigger extreme.
That's really helpful. And I thought it was interesting to learn that like hyper focus could be part
Mhm.
of it, because it's not just, you can't pay attention. It's
Yeah.
maybe like you can't pull your attention away from something else.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't really regulate our focus, and we can't really choose exactly where to put our focus on. And yeah, that's one of the biggest misconception is that we just can't focus at all. And I was somebody when I was a child, I always read for hours and hours. And that's partially why I didn't think I could have ADHD for the longest time, because I
Hmm.
was thinking, hey, I can, focus. I couldn't have ADHD, but that's a misconception. It could be hyper focus.
That's so interesting. And I was doing like a little kind of research to prepare for this, and one of the analogies someone said was like, imagine that you're sitting in front of 5 TVs and
Yeah.
all the shows are interesting and you just can't really filter like which one it is you're supposed to be paying attention to.
Yes. Yes. That's a good analogy. I love it.
Yeah, so this is really interesting when we start to think about mindfulness, because
Mm-hmm.
there's so much about directing your attention and being, at choice in where you're placing your attention.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I can see already where there might be some benefits and some real challenges with
Yes.
that. But I'd love to ask you first, like, how was it you discovered you had ADHD, and has that been helpful for you to identify?
Yeah, so I discovered I have ADHD when I was working at Cloud Sangha actually, and it was kind of a dream organization I was working with. My coworkers were so awesome. You know, the mission really mattered to me, but still, I was getting bored of it to some extent, and that's
Can
a
you,
very
for people, sorry
yes.
who to interrupt, but who don't know what Cloud Sangha is, because we've mentioned it twice, would you just say a little bit about who that is and what that is?
Yes, so Cloud Sangha is a mindfulness startup that started by Jack Kornfield and Tara Brach and some other Silicon Valley guys that they provide this online Sangha experience, online community experience for mindfulness practitioners. So I was working there and I was very lucky working there, but still I was getting bored. So I was wondering what was going on. And I just happened to run across some ADHD content and kept reading it, kept listening to it, and learning about other people's experience. That's when I realized this inability to pick a career and stick with it is a pretty huge mark of ADHD in adulthood. I just can't pick anything. Like you said, like all the TV shows are interesting. How do I supposed to just pick one and stick with it? Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, I can relate to that myself
Yeah.
because I find so many things interesting. And, but I bet you were really like surprised when you're at Cloud Sanka and you're like, I have awesome coworkers. We're doing this important work that I really believe in. Why am I bored?
Yes, yes. Yeah, so it goes with the ADHD's need to constantly be learning. So even if onboarding is difficult or learning new things is difficult, I still enjoy that much more than when everything is very predictable. And that's a very common experience for ADHD adults at workplace. We just prefer to keep learning and keep being challenged, and that's just part of how to utilize ADHD folks the best.
Well, I think we really need people like that, because I'm not one who thrives on like too much change and chaos and like
Yeah.
too many surprises. I like things to like I kind of like my schedule to be stable and to not
Mhm.
have too many things pop up. That makes me sort of like anxious. So,
Mhm.
you know, I think we definitely need people who thrive on that and who really like that kind of more unpredictable
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah, actually, ADHD folks do work very well under chaos. Like, so a lot of them tend to gravitate towards ER jobs or nurse or those jobs that
Mm.
really is on the front line. I have heard an analogy that really makes sense to me. Is almost the external chaos finally matched the internal chaos, and we're just in Zen.
You're like, I know how to deal with this.
Yes.
This makes sense. This
Yes.
fits.
Yep.
Oh wow. Yeah. So that's like a gift in some ways for sure.
Yeah.
So you were experiencing like this kind of surprising boredom and disenchantment with what you thought was this great opportunity and this
Mhm.
great job. And so then you went through a process of like getting a diagnosis for ADHD.
Yes, yes, I was getting a diagnosed with ADHD, and it was a combination of reviewing my developmental history or just my history of how it shows up. And I did a computerized test with my psychiatric nurse and just self reported questionnaire as well. And luckily, I was able to find a psychiatric nurse who have diagnosed adult women before, which is a key. Like a lot of times when adult woman goes in, for a diagnosis, if the person never worked with adult women before, they're more likely to, I think, just not treat it as seriously, versus if you're working with somebody who has worked in similar cases before, they're more
Mm.
likely to take you seriously and encourage you to go along with the diagnostic journey.
So they might just like see an adult woman and be like, "You're just stressed, you're just overwhelmed," and
Yeah.
not really see that they fit the pattern of
Yeah.
ADHD.
Yeah, if some of them they may think that, "Oh, you finish a degree, you have a job."
How
Like
could you be?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. You don't fit the stereotype of, like,
Yeah.
the kid at school who can't stay at their desk and sit
Mhm.
still, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting 'cause it's, like, very high sometimes very high performing people with a
Yeah.
lot of success and a lot of, like, degrees or certifications or that kind of academic success could maybe mask the symptoms of ADHD or just not be what people think
Yeah.
of when they think of ADHD.
Absolutely. Structures, that's a huge way to mask. So, if your family or school provided enough structures for ADHD children when they were younger, then it's less likely they have external manifested symptoms. So, usually, women tend to show symptoms in college or later when the family structure is taken away from us and we're not in the very strict, like high school structure. Like, in college, I have to be the one waking up and go into classrooms, which means I probably am skipping classes. And that's when the symptoms first start showing up. And yeah, so structure is a huge masker. Yeah.
That's yeah, okay. So that's really that clarifies like some of the confusion, I think. Also, do you think that a person's cultural background influences how they relate to ADHD and like how it shows up for them or even if it's recognized as such?
Absolutely. So, Asian Americans actually have the lowest diagnostic percentage of ADHD. And some people may say, oh, it's a good thing, but could also mean that we're not aware of it and we're not seeking diagnosis. And it is true that like mental health in general is still very stigmatized in Asian communities, in Asian American communities. So, a lot of times we don't have the awareness of what this is. And even if we have the awareness, we may not talk to somebody about it or seek help. That's one. And the second is, I am an immigrant. So my experience of being an immigrant means I have to deal with paperwork and a lot of things. So that means I do develop a level of organization that's probably not regular to a regular ADHD folk, but I did it because of my lived experience. And
Mhm.
that could mask a lot of things too, because then I can transfer that organization skill to other areas of my life. And then it may look from the outside like, oh, she got it together. But internally, I'm so hyperactive with my brain and I'm like chaotic internally. So sometimes the internal and external experience don't necessarily match.
Yeah, that makes sense. How's it helped you to recognize ADHD in yourself or to have that diagnosis, that like that label you can name?
Yeah, it's been really helpful to first like have a community I can look into. Like I'm on Twitter for the ADHD community. I subscribe to a lot of podcasts and YouTube, just learn from other people's lived through experiences. And also just know that one of the key marks of ADHD is consistently inconsistent. So I'm less likely to judge myself if I wake up one day and just have really low energy and can't do anything I plan to do. I'm more likely to meet it with compassion. It actually really helps with my daily mindfulness or approach to my life. Just like, oh, okay, it's like this right now. It's more
Mm.
likely I will accept it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you find that you're not alone and you
Yes.
can hear from other people and it's so validating to have that mirrored back to you that others
Absolutely.
have similar circumstances.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And you've begun sharing your own journey too. So I think that's, you're already giving back to that community and sharing it from your particular perspective, which is
Yeah.
I think really wonderful.
Yeah, when I got diagnosed, I looked around. There's not a lot of Asian women talking about it. So I was thinking like, okay, let me just talk about it. Maybe other people might read my content and realize, oh, it's something is similar in them, and they can seek a diagnosis or at least learn more about it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm wondering, like, when in all of this did you start your mindfulness practice?
Yeah, so I started my mindfulness practice in college when I was first going through like insomnia and depression. So started with like really simple like mantra practices and headspace when it was still free. And yeah, I did like just learn basic, very basic mindfulness of breath or body scan through those apps, and then did it in grad school as well, mostly as a way to tackle my exam anxiety. Yeah, and then in 2020, that's when I really started to commit to more of a daily practice, and because the world was in shambles and I need something to help me.
Yeah, that was a good time to start
Yeah.
a
Yes.
mindfulness practice because a lot of us had more time and a lot more uncertainty. So it makes
Yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you started with kind of like the apps, and
Mhm.
because you felt the need to do something for yourself in
Mhm.
college, and then that deepened during the pandemic in 2020. And did you
Yeah.
go to like mindfulness classes with people, or did you find people online to learn from?
Yeah, so my experience has mostly been online. So I did a power of awareness course, and of course, I was in Cloud Sangha groups for a while. Yeah, so mostly my experience has been online, and even my retreat experience so far has been online too. I would love to go to an actual meditation center and get an experience of that as well.
Yeah, maybe nowadays it'll be a little
Yeah,
easier since we're coming out of the pandemic, or at least it's like shifting to the more endemic stage, and
yeah.
we're learning how to do things again, like have meditation retreats together in
Mhm.
person and do it safely.
Mhm. Yeah.
So did you have any challenges in your meditation practice that you look back now that you know that you have this ADHD diagnosis that you would link to that?
Absolutely. So I one thing when I was trying to stick with daily practices in 2020, I was doing intuitively as I was exploring a lot of different types of meditation, and I would rotate the types I do every day. So I would really explore different teachers and guided, unguided, with music, without music, and movement based or more sitting based. And I intuitively know that I can't just stick with one practice every single day. I would kind of notice how I feel that day. If it's more anxiety, I would do more like movement based, kind of use my limbs to shake
Mhm.
and calm myself down. Or if it's more a lot of emotions, I may do more of a mindfulness of emotion kind of practice, or more heart based, like loving kindness or gratitude kind of practice. So I intuitively just knew that I couldn't just stick with one practice and that won't work for me.
Well, that's beautiful because, meditation is such a vast,
Yes.
field of things. And even mindfulness meditation is a big umbrella that includes
Yes.
all kinds of different tools and techniques. And that's one of the things we learn is how to check in what's going on right now, and how do I meet this, and how do I
Mhm.
choose the right practice and the right tool. So it seems
Mhm.
like you just naturally gravitated to that right from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing I really want to encourage ADHD folks is to explore the vastness of meditation. It's not just sitting down and pay attention to your breath. There's so many wonderful practices out there. And even within mindfulness, there's the more like observing, witnessing, and there's the more heart-based ones and there's body-based ones. So the world is vast, and variety and newness is something a very great motivator for ADHD folks.
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes bums me out when I feel like someone maybe tried one kind of meditation
Yes.
and they were like, "That didn't work. I'm done with meditation. I can't meditate."
Yeah, yeah. I sometimes use the analogy of working out. Just think about how many types of workout there is. There's like cardio, there's lifting, there's in the gym, there's in a classroom, there's doing it on your own. There's just so many different types. To some extent, I think meditation is kind of like that, but they're all like workouts, and all different meditations are meditations.
We talked a little bit about you were kind of saying like you need variety in your
Hmm.
practice, and I think you mentioned as well that it can be hard to have like one set time a day where you always do your meditation.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Like how do you develop a consistent practice if that's hard to like have that structure and schedule?
Yeah, so I tend to try aim for like 3 time slots a day. So I may do it around like in the early afternoon, because my peak productivity is usually late afternoon, evening. So I try to do it before that time, or I will try to do it as a way of transitioning out of work. So like later in the evening, or my fail-safe catch is like right before bed. So I have
Mm-hmm.
like different points I can try to put my meditation practice in there, and I know like those are the times that work well for me. And that's also a big thing that I want people to know, that all ADHD folks are different. Like my ADHD shows up differently from other people. So for another person, their peak time may be in the morning. So for them, maybe morning practices may work better. So it's all a matter of trial and error. Try it on for yourself and see what works for you.
And like really observing yourself to
Yep.
notice like what was that like? How did that
Yes.
work? What do I need today?
Yes. Yes.
Which is all very in the spirit of mindfulness.
Yes. Yeah. Mindfulness and kindness and nurturing for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. How long do you practice for? Is that consistent or does that vary?
It varies. It really depends. Like nowadays, I have the luxury of having a deck. So if the weather permits, I will sit outside, and that's easier for me too. That's also another thing I want to advocate is, if you can get access to nature, try that, because nature is actually not super quiet. It's a very different experience from like if you're sitting inside and it's too quiet. A lot of times I will get sleepy, but I find I'm less likely to get sleepy actually in nature, because there's bug noises, there's birds, there's wind, there's just always something. My sensory is engaged. Was nature, I can meditate for longer. Inside I usually have a bit less period of focusing. But that's just I just try to do whatever I can do. I don't have a set time really to be like, oh, I need to meditate for 40 minutes, and if I fail, like I'm gonna judge myself. No, I
Then
don't
it
do
doesn't
that.
count.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting how nature can support the practice because you are sort of able to draw on the energy around you and the different
Yes.
sounds and the environment and the different sensory inputs,
Yes.
which is all mindfulness, because mindfulness
Mhm.
is not just like focusing on one thing. It's like inclusive, right? It
Mhm.
includes all the sounds, all the sensations, all the smells, like
Mhm.
all of the sights, anything
Yes.
that's touching our senses, we observe mindfully.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I find that engaging multiple senses, that's easier for me to combat sleepiness, which is one of my biggest hindrance in meditation.
Of the five hindrances.
Yeah, out of the five hindrances, yeah. So when I'm in nature, I usually also use like a mala beads, or even indoors I usually use a mala beads, because I or just hand holding something. I need that like audio sensory being engaged, usually by words or music or nature. I need to touch something, and then I find it easier to focus on either breath or my body breathing or my body in general. That could be something ADHD folks can play with, is just engage more of your senses and see what that's like.
I'm glad we're talking about that because it's a little counterintuitive for me. I think I would have probably thought the opposite, like remove all the different distractions, get it really quiet, make the environment like really neutral, and
Mhm.
then you can focus. But you're
Mhm.
saying the opposite is sometimes more helpful, to just let there be a little more texture to the environment and like take that in, and that can be supportive.
Yeah, I think it's similar to ADHD folks have like fidget toys, or we need the extra sensory input to help us to get to the optimal state of focus. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful for me to think about as a teacher as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so you were talking about being outside is and kind of different environments that support your practice, and music and different sounds and different inputs like touching the mala beads. Do you find it's easier to sit in a group of people or alone, or like how does that influence your practice if you're with
Mhm.
others or solo?
I don't think I've sitting a group like literally in
In
person
person?
yet, but I do have online experiences, and I do think sitting in group is very helpful. And in general, for ADHD folks, body doubling is a very good technique for us to get something done. That just
What's
means
body doubling? Is that you
yeah,
were
we
about to
just
say?
we coexist with another person in the same room, and then we may or may not work on the same thing. So for example, a lot of times I will be on the sofa, my partner may be by his desk, we both are working on our computer, but we're just kind of coexisting in the same room. For me, that counts as body doubling. It's easier for me to keep doing whatever I need to do than like if I'm truly alone in a room, I get distracted, I do whatever I want to do. So for a lot of ADHD folks, like coffee shops, library, those are really great. Or having study mates, if you do want to work with people, that could be good too. So in that sense, I do think a course or a group in meditation could be really helpful for ADHD folks. Yeah.
I've never heard that term, body
Yes.
doubling.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly like mirroring in that you have to be doing the same thing together, but just kind of like if someone's doing something similar in your
Hmm.
environment, it kind of like provides an anchor of
Yeah.
like we're doing this right now.
Yes. Yes. I think that's where library works.
Yeah, that's really interesting because like yeah, for me, I'm like so sensitive to sounds. I'm one of those people that like all the sounds distract me.
Yeah.
And so I'm like always just looking for a quiet space at home in my own little
Hmm.
corner. And it's just so helpful to not project my own experience onto others and to hear like a different perspective like yours. This is that works for you and that will probably work for a lot of other people as well.
Yeah, so like it could also mean that for you it may be there's like YouTube videos of people studying and it's like real time, like 2 hours long. Like sometimes I just put that on and it's almost like a way of virtual body doubling as well. And I listen to podcasts when I clean, like it's almost like a person next to me. So there's so many ways to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and even sitting with people online, doing meditation with people online, like on Zoom. Right now, a community that I practice with, we have a Zoom every morning at from
Hmm.
7:15 to 8 a.m. And you can drop in any part of that you want to because we're all muted. But just having like the visual of my friends
Yeah,
meditating with me, it helps me show up for it. And
absolutely.
I find like when I'm getting really lost in my head, sometimes if I just peek at the screen and I'm like, oh, yeah, we're meditating together, that
Yes.
really helps me to come back. So I think there is some energy to that.
Hmm.
Just doing things together, even
Absolutely.
like whether we're in physical presence or we're in online presence.
Yes, yes, I agree.
Yeah, so helpful. I think for like any of us who are learning to meditate to
Mhm.
have others along with us.
Yeah.
And because meditation tends to be like such a silent experience, like we're not verbalizing what's happening to us while we're meditating usually.
Yeah.
Although I've done
Yeah.
verbal vipassana exercise before, which is when you kind of note out loud, which is pretty interesting. It's as a teacher, I don't get very much information from people about what is
Mhm.
happening in their head, right? When I'm
Mhm.
teaching movement, I can look at them and see if they understood what I said. I can see, like, oh, they're not raising their arm all the way. I wonder if something hurts in their shoulder. Like, so I get more information from seeing what they're doing. But when
Mhm.
someone's meditating in front of me or I'm sitting with somebody, like, I don't necessarily know what their experience is like. What is that like for you as someone who may be having an internal experience that others are not familiar with, or that you see others sitting still and what do you think about their practice?
Yeah, so for me, that goes into kind of I'm pretty picky about guided meditations. I need the person to not speak too much because if ADHD impacts our sensory processing as well, so auditory processing is part of it. A lot of times, I find if the guided meditation to be too full, like that means the person is giving a lot of instruction and not as much time for me to process it, then I'm just completely delineating from it. I'm doing something else.
Oh, me
Uh,
too.
yeah. Yeah, so that's also like kind of counterintuitive because beginners usually the suggestion is giving them a bit more instruction and giving them a bit more guidance. But so play with that balance is interesting. And with my internal experience, I found noting to be really helpful. And I just do very, very simple categorization of future, past. I don't do the emotion thoughts because I can't really distinguish them, and or planning. Sometimes that's helpful too, but when it fails, I just do future, past, and ADHD folks, sometimes too much categorization can overwhelm us too. Like, oh, where
Mm.
do I fit this one in? Where exactly does it fit? And so for me, I just know very simply, oh, future, past.
I like that because it's really just noticing when you are not in the present moment,
Hmm.
and it doesn't really matter like what the content of that is. It's
Yeah.
just going, oh, let me come back to what's here
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
noting, that's a really classic mindfulness technique, but
Hmm.
you've sort of found a way to modify that a little bit for yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Are there other techniques like within mindfulness that you think that work particularly well or that you've adjusted a little bit?
Yeah, so for me, I really like the meta loving kindness practice or rain practice in a
Mhm.
way that there's very clear to dos. Otherwise, my
Yeah.
brain may be like, oh, what am I supposed to do now? Like just going everywhere. But with those, there's kind of a clear sequence or clear guidelines that can be really helpful, especially if I'm very frazzled, and that could be really good for me as an anchor. And rain is actually really good for emotional regulation, and that's part of what ADHD impacts as well. And I encourage my clients to kind of explore different ways of nurturing, because a lot of times words, they have a difficult time coming up with words or gestures even. So maybe like poems they love, or paintings, or songs, just any way, like expand expand the nurturing step to just their daily life, and really cultivating a playlist or a little Pinterest board of what's nurturing for you. Yeah.
I love the creativity in that, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of space for that in really what mindfulness is. Maybe not in
Hmm.
always the ways that mindfulness is presented, but
Yeah.
but hopefully we can get more and more creative as we
Yes.
go along. And that's interesting. So you like having the structure of like say these four meta phrases and repeat
Yeah.
this, and that there's this sequence, and that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's helpful. Or the framework of RAIN, which is like we're moving through recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, and then what is here after the rain.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting. You talked a little bit about like mindfulness of breathing as well. And can that sometimes be a challenge, or how would you work with it when
Yeah.
challenges arise with that?
Yeah, so for that, I may do like a breathing practice before I do mindfulness of breathing. So I may do like a box breathing or 4-7-8, and
Hmm.
then use that kind of calm my nervous system down a bit. Then I move on to mindfulness of breathing. So I tend to be more into like the whole body breathing rather than like my nose. That's just too little sensation, and sometimes it's difficult for me to pay attention to just that. Yeah.
So that helps to do like more of a breath practice, like, or like a pranayama where
Mhm.
you're changing the breath, you're
Yes.
influencing the breath, you're counting the breath, which is
Mhm.
different than what we do in mindfulness when we're actually just observing the breath
Yes.
in whatever way it's showing up. And
Mhm.
that's a helpful way for you to sort of move into mindfulness of breathing, to kind of warm up for mindfulness of breathing.
Yeah, I think it's also similar to I would do a bit. Sometimes I do a bit movement practice, like expressive meditation called shaking and dancing. I learned it from Dr. Gordon. He has a book called Transformation, which is all about like healing trauma and stuff like that. So he has this practice called shaking and dancing, which is really just you shake, you pause, and you dance, and that's really good for energy releasing. Or if I have a lot of anxiety or fear, I really gravitate towards that technique. And sometimes after that, I can then sit down and do a mindfulness practice. So, in a sense, I think now I start to realize the patterns is I tend to do a bit more structured at the beginning. And
Hmm.
then once I'm kind of calm and centered, I can do more of the unstructured mindfulness practice, like unguided ones.
That makes complete sense to me, that it requires like a little bit more attention to how you set yourself up for practice.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us can benefit from that, quite honestly,
Yeah.
because like it's hard to meditate when your nervous system is kind of like jangly. A lot of us are going through the day getting a lot of sort of nervous system dysregulation piling up. And then we try to sit
Hmm.
down and meditate, and we're like, oh my gosh, why can't I do this?
Yeah.
And why can't I be peaceful right now? And
Yes.
that's where doing those kinds of breath practices or movement practices beforehand as a way of leading into the meditation can be super helpful.
Yeah, that's so true. And ADHD folks actually need longer transition time, just moving between things and things. Yeah, so that totally makes sense why I need a longer setup. And it's almost like a longer warm up. Sometimes I think in the gym, you just need a longer warm up that day, and then you can have a great exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really relate to that too because I just think it can be so abrupt when we're like, okay, I just answered 32 emails and now I'm going to sit on my cushion. Boom. Like,
Yeah.
is that realistic for anybody? Like,
Yeah,
that you can just
true.
let go that abruptly and be doing something else that's so different. Like, I
Yeah.
think that um, it's helpful to have some kind of transition or some kind of demarcation or just some
Hmm.
kind of way of like letting your nervous system catch up with what you are planning to do next.
Exactly. Yeah. The body and the nerve system give them the signal like, "Hey, come on. Let's do the practice now."
Yeah, yeah. And so you mentioned sometimes you do like sitting meditation, sometimes you do mindful movement, or sometimes you do like a combo of the
Mhm.
two. Can you talk a little bit about like how you find mindfulness in movement or how that supports your practice?
Yeah, so I'm actually wanting to explore more about that because in MMTCP, the training I'm taking, we just gone through a bit of walking meditation teaching, and then in my group, somebody had this genius idea of they shared of combining walking meditation with metta loving kindness, and so I've been playing with that a little bit when I let my dog out for her to go use the bathroom. So I'm just indoor waiting for her because she's out in the yard and just I'm waiting for her anyway. So I will be like walking a little bit and doing like phrases and yeah, for me I really love the expressive meditation. Like that's the one I really drawn to. um I sometimes think also analogy with my dog, like she needs to run and get a zoomy and really run around crazy and then she's calm. So I view the expressive meditation as my version of zoomy. Like just get the energy out and then I can like calm and observe and see what's going on. Yeah.
I love that. And my cat's like that too. That he's got to get the zoomies at least a couple times a day and run up and
Yeah.
down the hall. And then he's like taking a nap.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think we're not so different.
Yes.
We're animals as well. And
Yes.
we forget that. And we have these other expectations of
Yeah.
ourselves. But yeah, movement like walking meditation, so helpful and is its own form of mindfulness practice.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, just the walking on the carpet and I'm like, "Wow, the carpet is soft. I've never noticed that before." How it's like cushiony and like how it, hugs my foot. I'm like, "Huh, I walk every day and I don't notice that." And then suddenly it's like, "Oh, I'm noticing this."
It's a beautiful thing to
Yeah.
the way mindfulness can just open up those details and help us be more and more present in the spaces we inhabit all the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Savor it too. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it was interesting when you were talking about the doing the breath exercise before the mindfulness of breathing because I think that earlier on in my practice, because I've been around for quite a while, there was like a thing where teachers used to not want you to do pranayama or exercises
Mhm.
because they were kind of like, they were thinking, you won't be able to stop manipulating your breath. You won't be able to stop counting your breath and just observe
Mm.
it. And so they were like, don't mix the two, don't do both. But I really appreciate your perspective and what you're saying is like sure we can use it as a transition and we can be clear about like right now I'm counting the breath and then I'm going to let that go and
Mhm.
just be an observing and they can complement each other.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also probably part of my cultural background because I grew up in China, and in our culture, it's very all religion or spiritual practice are very pretty much mixed together. Like if you go to a Chinese funeral, there may be like Buddhism next to Taoism. Like it's just how we live. And so
Hmm.
for me, like I don't have this need to clearly be like I belong to this school of practice and I'm only gonna do this. So I'm very much like mixing things together.
Yeah, that is different. I talked to somebody about that before who was from an Asian culture, and she was like, I can be Buddhist and Christian at the same time. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Not how I grew up. You had to like be one of the
Yeah.
only one option, you know?
Yeah.
That's really refreshing that you have that flexibility to learn from different things and to really like bring together what works for you.
Mhm. Yeah.
What about the body scan technique? How does that work for you? Do you enjoy that one? And not that you speak for
Yeah.
all people with
Yeah.
ADHD, but I'm just picking your brain today.
Yes. So for me, I do like that one, but shorter. I tend to do like I like what Tara does for her meditation. Like she almost always start with the body scan before she moves on to whatever practice it is today. I really like that one. I've tried to do like those really long MBSR type of body scan before. I always end up like falling asleep. I don't know why.
Hmm.
So it's just a matter of noticing what works for me and which like the length and maybe with music, without music, what works better for me. Yeah.
And it is interesting too that you benefit from having music in your
Mm-hmm.
meditation, because that's another thing that classical mindfulness would not have music included. Because I mean, what I've always heard teachers say is, well, then we would just have to be noting hearing, hearing, hearing the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
maybe
th-
not.
yeah, for me, it's kind of, I know the meditation is not over. I don't have to think about, oh, like, is this meditation over? But if there's music going in between the silent space, then I know this meditation is still going on. And I don't have to worry about that.
So it's like a container for you. It's
Yes.
like part
Yes.
of what contains that period of meditation.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I know that
Mm-hmm.
it's helpful for people, like when I used to teach yoga classes in person. I always debate, like, should I have music? Should I not have music? But I tended to play music because I just
Mm-hmm.
got that feedback so often from people that helped them relax.
Yeah.
But I did have to be careful to choose music that
Yes.
wasn't going to take over the class,
Yes.
and where
Yeah.
it's becoming about that. So it
Yeah.
has to be like background enough, but it could be soothing and help create an environment for people to relax enough to really practice.
Mhm. Yeah, and also on Zoom, that the challenge a lot of times is when people are super quiet, you're like, "Oh, are they fall off the line, or is the meditation going?" Like, there's just 'cause so many possibilities, but if there's kind of just a little bit of music in the background, then at least I will think like, "Okay, it's still going on." Like, "Okay, that's good."
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
I've never taught meditation with music in the background, but you're making me think about, the benefit of that. That's
Yeah.
really, yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it's just so good to think about how we can be more creative and adaptive with the practice, or if you teach, with like how you approach that, and not to be so rigid, and to really reflect on like what is the essence of what we're trying
Mm.
to achieve here. What is it that's
Mhm.
really important, and what are the many ways we could bring that about, that it doesn't have
Mhm.
to always look one way.
Yeah, I think mindfulness for me, a big part of it is like redirecting and starting again. And that actually really helps me in general in my life, in ADHD life. Sometimes, yeah, I fall off my meditation habit track and I'm like, okay, it's time to restart again. And that's actually what I learn and what I train in meditation is keep going, coming back to the anchor and keep starting again. And as well as how we relate. And I first learned this from Tara Brach, but it's I think some quote that we meet our practice edge and soften, and that's just so different from how usually the society teaches us. It's like you power through something, like you gonna conquer this, but this is like, oh, we meet our edge and soften, and that for me is kind of the essence of mindfulness, of being aware of the edge and being kind to it.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a lot of lessons within mindfulness about self acceptance and
Yes.
kindness that help you as you like navigate with this diagnosis and move through your daily life in a way that doesn't look the same as necessarily like everyone else around you.
Absolutely. And even just I see a lot of similarities because in MMTCP, we talk about like the common meditation hindrance and like how to like normalize that for if we're teaching to mindfulness beginners. And I think that's like really helpful for ADHD folks too. It's knowing that, hey, like we all have these troubles in meditation or in a larger context, hey, we all have similar struggles in life. And normalize that to a certain degree and know that we're not alone, yeah, that really helps.
It is such a relief when you hear someone just kind of say, "Hey, this is just part of being human," or
Yes.
"This is just one of the flavors of being human." You're just
Yeah.
like, "Oh, thank goodness."
Mhm.
Right? It's like,
Mhm.
"Okay, there's nothing wrong with me and I can just start again and
Yeah.
see what's here."
Yeah, when I used to like really struggle with sleepiness, I didn't know. I was like, "Oh, am I really this tired all the time?" Until I learned the five common hindrance, which is like wanting, aversion, restlessness, sleepiness, and doubt. And I realized, oh, people have been struggling this for thousands of years, so I'm not alone.
It's huge. It's something that comes up I think for any of us
Yeah.
who practice is like that balance of energy between the restless mind and the like dullness of mind, and we kind of
Mhm.
move back and forth between them, looking
Yeah.
for that middle ground.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, and it is amazing how the teachings can like illustrate these human traits that have been part of us for so long.
Yes.
2,500 years ago this was noticed at least, and
Yeah. That's
and we're
amazing.
still
Somebody
working
can
on it.
observe and categorize it 2000 some years ago. That's amazing. Yeah.
And it still applies to us now, and
Yep.
it's not just because we now have iPhones. People were also restless 2,500 years ago, right?
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe we have some more or different challenges on that front, but
Mhm.
it's just part of being human.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to someone who has ADHD and who's
Mhm.
they know that and they're interested in using some mindfulness practices to, you know, just help out with what they're going through?
Yeah, I think Ring is really great for emotional regulation and it's very structured. There's steps. So that may be an easier entry point. And then really is just explore the different varieties of meditation and see what works for you specifically and what you need that specific day and start small. It could be as simple as like you're waiting for a dog to go to the bathroom and you're waiting so you just do some mindfulness of walking and or you're waiting for your water to boil when you're making tea your mindfulness of sound or it just see what little moments you can incorporate start small and we don't actually there's research showing even a 5 to 10 minutes of meditation could really help ADHD folks with emotional regulation
Mm.
focus and many other things so we don't have to do like a 30-40 minute sit to get the benefit out of it and also the big thing is just it's okay to restart over and over again and meet your edges and soften and treat it with compassion and kindness however that may look like for you and even if you have an answer sometimes it's just helpful to ask the question I wonder how might I treat this with kindness and maybe an answer come maybe it doesn't and that's all okay yeah and explore it with different anchors just explore the variety of meditation like that's the thing I really want people to understand is there's so many different practices out there it's not just sitting down and paying attention to your breath.
I love that. And would you suggest taking the time to kind of like practice being with different teachers and see whose like style works for you and whose voice and whose
Absolutely.
pace and all of that works for you?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the benefit of, the age we live in now that lots of teachers they have their website, have their podcast, they have insight timers. Yeah, go explore like who you like. Do you like more guided practices, less guided practices and, movement practices, hard practices and see who you're drawn to. And everybody drawn to different things and I think follow what we're drawn to. A lot of times our intuition just knows what we need.
Mm. and like trust that intuition.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
no, that's like part of mindfulness, actually. Observing
Yeah.
yourself, meeting yourself with what you need.
Yeah.
I'm really curious what advice you would give to a meditation teacher like myself who doesn't identify as having ADHD, but they want to make their teaching more accessible for people who do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that MMTCP is teaching us is offering different postures, offering different anchors. I think that could be big because sometimes if you're just offering breath as an anchor, that may be difficult for people to access. And I think probably normalize hindrances from the beginning. That could be really helpful. Just know that, like, oh, if you struggle with restlessness or struggle with aversion or wanting, that's normal. Like, that is part of the practice. And really just, I would say, probably listening to your audience and feedback and see like what is going on with them. Like you said before, it's hard to observe from the outside like what's
Hmm.
going on inside. So just having the dialogue open, I think that could be really helpful too. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I always find it really helpful to kind of have a little dialogue back and forth after a practice. Like, what came up for you? What was that like?
Yeah.
And sort of hear
Yeah.
from people because then you can speak to what is in the room and
Mm-hmm.
not make assumptions.
Absolutely. Yeah. What come up? How was it like? I love those questions. Yeah.
When you were saying normalizing like the restlessness and things like that, the hindrances that come up.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's huge. Just knowing that that's part of the process, like having mind that have thoughts, that's normal. Yes, and also like going back to kind of the evolution of biology, like the default network system in our brain, the one where we're not necessarily focusing on something and then it's just scanning and searching. Um, I think I read somewhere that the default network system is a bit more active for ADHD folks, which makes sense because we're always just like very thinking in association, not necessarily focusing on one specific thing. So knowing that, oh, like that's part of our biology. And then so if we're like distracted or if we're thinking thoughts, like that's part of the story. That's okay. And that doesn't mean like you're too distracted to meditate.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good to know. That's very interesting that the default mode network might be even more active in
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And just to kind of summarize like what you were saying for teachers, like offering options in
Yeah.
terms of like the technique, be it mindfulness of breathing or body scan or mindfulness of sounds or metta phrases or all the different variety movement practices, all the different things we can offer. And also the meditation posture itself. Like you
Mm-hmm.
could be sitting, you could be lying down, you could be standing, you could do walking meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Because we think about, I think, sitting. And a lot of
Yeah.
people think about sitting on the floor, and this is what meditation looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just offering options. Yeah, definitely. And then having people explore what they like to explore. Yeah, follow curiosities. I think those are huge too.
Yeah, one thing that has really come up in like the yoga world in the last several years is like when we offer options to not make them a hierarchy.
I like
Like,
that.
this is the right way, but if you can't do that, you could use this block.
Yeah.
Right? Right? So, like, we've tried to take that out of the language where it's like, this is option A, this is option B. It's equally good. You
Yeah.
can sit on the floor, you can sit in a chair, you could, do this, do that. And so I think that's worth noting here, like when we talk about in meditation practice as well, to like offer those options as equally beneficial.
I love that. And it's almost also I'm thinking about like the idea of meditation, like, oh, you need to meditate for like, I don't know, 30 minutes, an hour. Oh, that's good. But if you can't do it, do like shorter. But maybe the shorter practices is just as meaningful and as helpful on their own.
Yeah, maybe it's more about small moments many times and
Yes.
like weaving it into your day. Because
Mm-hmm.
you could be like a beautiful meditator for 30 minutes every day and then be like a bad person for
Frazzled.
the whole rest of the
Yeah,
day. You could be robbing banks for the rest of the day. I don't know.
that's true. That's true.
Hopefully not, but
Yeah.
it's right. It's more about like how we weave it through our life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
how we learn to live our mindfulness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I think your episode on like the everyday mindfulness, that could be really interesting for people to learn and listen to as well. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'll be sure to link to that one in the
Yeah.
resources. And you've mentioned several resources too that I'll put on the show notes page for this
Mm-hmm.
episode so people can find like rain practice and
Yeah.
some of the different things that you've mentioned. And along with that, I will definitely link to your work. And can you tell us a little more about like where people can find you and the different resources you're creating?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, which is just www.adhdasiangirl.com, or I'm usually on Twitter. I know it's not called Twitter now, but I'm still calling it Twitter.
We're never gonna not call it Twitter. I think
I
that got
know.
to be realistic about that. No
Yeah.
one's calling it X.
Yeah, so the ADHD Asian Girl, yeah, the Twitter or website, and I have a resources page on my website that actually have a few meditation practice linked on there. That's the ones I really think could work in different situations, and I'm thinking about also starting my YouTube channel. I have started, but I still need to make more videos of it, and I'm thinking about recording my own version of those practices I'm really drawn to as well.
Nice.
So yeah, just website or Twitter, you can find me there. And I'm also on Instagram or Threads, but Twitter is really where I usually hang out.
That's your home base.
Yeah,
We connected on Threads
Threads.
like
Yeah,
the first week that Threads existed,
I
which
know.
was cool because this is such a digression, but it was cool because like I knew we were friends on Instagram, but I
Yep.
never would see your posts. And then because just a few people came over to Threads right away, you just saw different stuff and different
Yeah.
people. And like I saw what you were doing with ADHD Asian Girl, and that's how this episode came about.
Yeah. And the algorithm is different because Threads is more time based. They don't do the like whole ranking and stuff like that.
Yeah, not yet. They haven't ruined it yet.
Yeah, they haven't.
Well, I'm really glad that I ran across you on there and learned more about what you're doing, and really appreciate what you've offered today and some things for me to definitely think about. Um, Thank you so much, Ying.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, and like I said, like I think you have a lot of episodes that'd be great to for ADHD folks to learn more about how to weave the mindfulness into the day and what it could look like and the movement and the daily practices. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's really helpful for me to have an awareness that like the approach that resonates for me could also resonate for people for a different reason, like
Yeah.
perhaps because of ADHD.
Yeah.
So I can learn more about that and like include more people. So
Yeah.
thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ying. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
So that's today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with a friend, subscribe on YouTube, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and help others find it that way. To learn more about my work, the Moved to Meditate class library, courses, or teacher trainings, go to movedtomeditate.yoga. This is Addie D. Hilster. Thanks so much for listening.